Ari Temkin, Big 12 Radio Network on TuneIn Radio joins us. Great to have Ari with us. Craig and Paul, David Smoke on 365 Sports. So I have a brain freeze time for you. So the Big 12 football tiebreakers came out about a week or so ago, like everybody else's did. And the first tiebreaker is if two teams are tied for first, both teams participate in the championship game. The winner of the head-to-head will be the number one seed. If there is not a tie, does the game with Kansas State, Arizona count as head-to-head?
It does not. No, great question. And I'll be honest, we had the chief of football on with us, and we asked him, like Scott Draper, what it is, and it's funny because the day after is when they clarified it. So I wonder if he was caught off guard by us asking him or what. But no, in terms of the Baylor-Utah game, obviously this past weekend, and then now Friday, Arkansas, Arizona, and Kansas State, those are non-conference games. They're pre-scheduled, and I think the conference knew that they would be important games to hold on to. So they've kept them on. And those are the two for this season.
Ari, this last week was kind of white knuckle week in the Big 12 for non-conference games. Oklahoma State was lucky to get out with the win at Arkansas. Kansas State lucky to get out of New Orleans, without a loss. Texas Tech got absolutely rolled in the Palouse. What are your thoughts on the overall state of the conference after this last week?
Yeah, I see that there are 6 SEC teams in the top 7 of the AP top 25, and I don't get it. I don't know what Oklahoma State has to do in order to get some respect on a national level. It's ridiculous. Oklahoma State won 10 games last year. They played in the Big 12 championship game. They've now won 2 games, including one against the big bad SEC in Arkansas. And yet, how do they get rated in the top 7? I mean, Mizzou has played nobody. Tennessee beat an NC State team that had to survive late against West Carolina. It's crazy to me. The perception thing about the SEC has gone so far. The SEC is 5-5 so far in Power 4 opponent games in the non-conference. Mississippi State got housed by a team in Arizona State that was supposed to finish at the bottom of the Big 12. So it's a long way around, Paul, to answer your question. Like, I don't know. I mean, I know what it is. It's the perception of the SEC, but it's taken on a life form of its own, and it has no bearing on reality. And I think the thing that sucks is it does. Perception is reality in this case. The AP Top 25 isn't going to decide who's in the playoff, but it goes a long way in the CFP committee picking who their teams are every single week. And the idea that the SEC just wakes up on third base every year is absurd. And I mean, again, there's a handful of teams in there. It's like, you're telling me that Oklahoma State's resume is not better than Mizzou. Like, I know Mizzou had a good year last year and they followed it up. They're 2-0, but like Oklahoma State had a great resume last year. They followed it up. They're 2-0 with a better win than Missouri. I just don't get how they're top 15, but the big bad SEC, just because they're in there, Mizzou is now suddenly, top 6, top 7 for what? For giving up, 0 points in back-to-back games against Little Sisters of the Poor. Again, it's a perception thing, but it is reality in the case of college football. It goes a long way in figuring out what this thing looks like. And so as we kind of return to the idea of would the Big 12 get 2 teams in, I think K-State very well, again, based on resume, should probably be a top 10 team. I think Utah, you could argue, is a top 10 team getting a win over Baylor. How about Iowa State? Iowa State has as good of a win as anybody that's in that top 7 and with their win over Iowa. So, whether it's taking into account what happened last year, which you're not supposed to do, but it seems like that's part of it. Whatever it is, it's insane to me that the SEC just starts on third base and we just assume, in college football media, you just hear like, oh yeah, of course, that's the way it should work. Like, no, what, and on what planet should that work like that?
Ari, what's your concern level with Texas Tech 2 weeks in?
Whew. Well, how concerned are you guys in Waco? Now multiply that by 100. It seems like.
yeah, that's probably about right.
Yeah, I mean, look, did I think they'd lose as badly to Washington State as they did? No, but yeah, I mean, you figured after what happened against ACU week 1 that they were in big trouble. They've got a combination of issues in terms of their offense isn't playing great and their defense is not good at all. Not having Taj Brooks was a huge loss for them because They just don't have as good of a running back stable as some of these other teams in the Big 12 that can sustain, withstand the loss of a guy like Taj Brooks. But yeah, considering that Wazoo is not even a Power 4 team right now, that was a brutal show. I mean, they were in the game. I think it was 21-10. And then you look up, it's the fourth quarter, it's 34-10. I mean, it was just a housing. And, there's a ton of pressure on Joey McGuire. I think he's a great coach. I mean, you guys know him as well as anybody after his time in Waco and obviously at Cedar Hill. Like, everybody's rooting for him. He's a hell of a coach. He's a great personality. But yeah, this thing is circling the drain right now for Texas Tech. There's just not, like, Wazoo just destroyed Tech up front, which we shouldn't have been surprised about because ACU did it the week before.
Right.
No, you're right. They ran up a bunch of numbers, and Washington State ran for 300 plus yards in that game. So the Big 12 has some nice wins, and they have some like KU losing to Illinois, who's a team that Brett Bielema has had success where he's been, right? But that was a little bit I wouldn't surprise they lost to Illinois, but there's a little bit of rumblings with Jeff Grimes up there, and how come they didn't finish with those great running backs? And so not everything perfect in Lawrence, Kansas.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Smokey. Jalen Daniels did not look good at all in that game. He was bad. He did not give them a chance to win the football game. And despite that, their running game was clicking. Devin Neal was running for 7 yards a carry. Daniel Highshaw was running for 6 yards a carry. It's inexcusable that they would not lean on their run more down the stretch of that game, considering, again, Jalen Daniels is not playing very well. I mean, he had 3 picks in the game. He had a horrible pick 6 in this game that made Shedeur Sanders' pick 6 look like a much better play. And so just given, I think, the context of the game itself, when you have a lead in the fourth quarter with 2 different running backs averaging at least 6 yards a carry, and one of those guys, and Daniel Highshaw, only has 9 total carries in the game, and the other guy, and Devin Neal, only has 14, it feels like they've spent a career in limiting Devin Neal's carries. Dude's got to be at 20 to 25 carries in a game where you've got to lead late. It was inexcusable, Smokey. I mean, it's not like they were behind and trying to catch up. They were winning, and they weren't running the football with a quarterback that couldn't throw. It was inexcusable. And of course, as you know, I'm a KU alum.
Oh,
so
yeah.
It was really difficult to watch because that's a game they need to win. And it's like, okay, from a conference standpoint, how much goodwill is undone from a conference when you beat Iowa, when Iowa State beats Iowa, but then Kansas, which is a team that many picked to be towards the top of the Big 12, lost to a mid to lower level Big 10 team. Brutal.
Yeah, KU alums are just difficult in general. I mean, living with one, I can just tell you it's difficult. But
you guys don't talk college football much at your house, do you, Paul?
No,
she can really not give a damn about Kansas football.
Yeah. Although last week, she was out with her friends. I text her. I'm like, "Hey, KU just lost," and she like actually texted back, "Damn it." I was like, "Oh, now she's starting to care."
She thought it was an exhibition game against like Russia or something like that.
I guess. But Ari, you mentioned Shedeur Sanders and that awful pick 6. This is not going the way that anybody wants it at Colorado right now. And are you surprised that Dion didn't look at last year and change a lot of the things? Because they're like, the only thing they changed was like, well, it's not the scheme, it's the players we have. No, it's probably also a little bit the scheme and the way that you're calling these plays that you can't block or tackle.
Yeah. So a couple of things. Number one, I do think Nebraska's defensive front is very, very good. So I think it was a combination of not a great offensive line against an overpowering defensive front. I think going into that game, you could see this could pose major problems for Colorado offense. It's still trying to figure out what they have. They are better up front on offense. It just didn't appear that way in this game because, again, I do think that Nebraska front is that good. I don't know. When you force Raiola to throw, is he an inexperienced quarterback? How is he going to look throughout the remainder of the year? I don't know how good of a team they're going to be, but I do buy that defensive front. And we know Matt Rule, that's one of his calling cards is having that, that explosive defensive front. And I think he's got that. So I think it's a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. A few other things at play here. Number one, you obviously are not going to attract a ton of talent when you're the one telling people, hey, if you want to join our team, DM me. And you're basically putting together the roster, Shedeur Sanders, and then you go and complain about the roster that you and yourself put together. you're not going to find many people that are going to be happy for you or on your side when you do that, because that's it, right? You're mad and complaining to the media about the offensive line that you yourself put together. I don't get why on earth Dion thinks it's a good idea to employ old retread coordinators from the NFL as his offensive and defensive coordinators. Pat Shurmur is a very smart offensive mind. I think he's obviously put together an impressive resume and career. I just don't know that he's built to run college football in 2024. You've got to be more multiple. The pro style to me is a huge mistake, especially again, given what you have. You've got trouble along your offensive line. I mean, take a page out of Dave Aranda's book. Run some things to help the fact that you don't have a good offensive line like they're doing this year, as opposed to what Baylor continually tried to do last year. So I think like the marriage of Pat Shurmur as an offensive coordinator was not a good idea. Again, based on you don't have much of an offensive line. This is not how 2024 college football runs. If you're trying to get Shedeur to look his best, get him outside the pocket, get him running, rolling, get some movement, some pre-snap motion. And then their defensive coordinator is a guy that's long tenured NFL coach that's never called plays in Livingston. So, to me, the coordinator hires were puzzling. He's really big on hiring NFL guys. I just think, that would have been smarter. Now, what happened obviously last year was they didn't like what they were running on offense when they had that kind of an offensive coordinator. But I don't think it was the offensive coordinator's fault that the line couldn't block, and that's an improved offensive line. Again, I think expectations got so skewed for them because they started 4-0 last year, 3-0, whatever they were, 3-1, 4-1. I still think that this is a team that could be a bowl team. I really do. I think that game said a lot more about Nebraska than it did about Colorado, because I think that Nebraska defensive line is that good.
Arizona State had a really nice win over Mississippi State. Had to hold on there, but were very impressive, especially early. Cameron Scadaboo just doing his thing. A very fun player to watch this year in the Big 12. What's your interest level on a scale of 1 to 10 in Arizona State, Texas State on a Thursday night in San Marcos? Like, mine's a 10, Ari.
20, 30.
This game is really interesting, especially with Arizona State holding up their end of the bargain so far.
Yeah, so for one, I love Kenny Dillingham. The dude is amazing. He's so smart. He's so innovative. I love the way that he's so genuine with the media. He's just an open book. And I think in 2 weeks, this team has a pretty good identity, which is more than you can say about any other team in the Big 12 right now. Yep. They run the football effectively and they play defense and they get after you up front. I mean, they had a ridiculous big man touchdown that was the Old Trappers beef of the week.
Yep.
And CJ Fight, who had, one of the most amazing big man touchdowns you'll ever see. Basically, he kicked the ball as it was fumbled by Shapen. God, Baylor players all over the place. Players all over the place. Ball's fumbled by Shapen on a sack. It's going out of bounds. He actually kicked it. He grabbed it before it goes out of bounds and then has the wherewithal to stick his hands across the plane to get the touchdown. The announcers didn't even know that it was close to being a touchdown, didn't even announce it as it was. And I think watching it live, it was hard to identify that that's what he was doing. Super smart play. They called it a thick 6. Good job, Big 12, with the branding there. Yeah. I love them, and I love this matchup. This is a really difficult matchup for them because we haven't totally gotten a sense of how good they really are. Wyoming has looked terrible, and they're 0-2. And then Mississippi State, I guess they're in the SEC. So, if Mississippi State gets one good win in the SEC this year, they'll probably be ranked in the top 25 in the playoff chase for all we know. So, look, Texas State just housed UTSA at a game that, many thought to be kind of as we're looking at the radar for a group of 6 team that could be a playoff team. The Texas State UTSA game is one that we thought could go a long way in helping to determine that. And Texas State just housed them. So I love that. And the fact that it's, in San Marcos is really interesting. It's a good, true road game for them it's Thursday night, right? That's there's like, 2 Friday night games and 1 Thursday night game in the Big 12 this week.
Yeah. So that's Thursday night on ESPN too. Yep. That game, that Texas State ASU game on Thursday night. Is there anything we haven't brought up about the Big 12 that you go, you got TCU, of course, in an interesting game coming up at home against UCF, and UCF Jefferson was in the first week, okay, a little bit better last week. And then this one here, TCU, I keep thinking they're 1-1, but they won that game against Stanford. So these are 2 teams that could be fun to see what happens here.
This is a really interesting game. And by the way, this is a Big 12 game. I know it is confusing because there's been Big 12 games that haven't been counted as Big 12 games. This is the first Big 12 game of the year. And it could not have been drawn up any better. It's UCF right now is starting to get a real national love in terms of being a legitimate player in the Big 12. Look, they've got the best running game, arguably in college football. RJ Harvey was a 1,400-yard back last year. Penny Boone was a 1,400-yard back last year. And he transferred in. We know about the two other guys that are speedsters that they can line up, in the slot, or they line up in the backfield. So and then of course you think about the brilliance of Gus Malzahn as an offensive play caller. Like, there's just so many toys at his disposal. It's such an interesting, intriguing team. And I think for TCU, there's some cautious optimism. Defensively, they look a lot more disruptive. How quickly is that Andy Avalos defense taking when they're switched from that, the rush 3 drop 8 to more of the 4-2-5 traditional look. So, I mean, they've had success with it early, but they haven't really played anybody. Stanford and Palo Alto is the best game, and who knows how good that team is. So I certainly give UCF the early nod, but there's a lot of intriguing about TCU, and especially quarterback with Josh Hoover, a lot of unknowns. He's been good so far, but do they have enough playmakers? I like Jack Besh, who's a wide receiver who transferred over from LSU, but that's a really intriguing game. I'm also, like the Cam Rising thing, guys. He just plays with a reckless abandon. The play that he got hurt on, there's no need for it, and it's been so stressed to him. Don't take those kinds of hits. And, and people want to argue it's a dirty hit, whatever you want to argue, like, he puts himself in position to get those hits, sustain those hits that are going to continually get him hurt. They've got Zach Wilson's brother, Isaac Wilson, as the backup, who came in obviously in the second half. And Utah, if not for the Cam Rising injury, I have no idea what that score would have been, but I guarantee you that second half would have been a lot more interesting. I thought that game in particular was, all I had to do was watch the first half, and I knew exactly what happened to the entire game. And then we can all point and laugh at OU for having to survive against Houston, who might be the worst team in the Big 12. And I think that game said a lot more about OU than it did about Houston. So we can all point and laugh at them as they head into the SEC, having just barely squeaked by a Houston team that's not very good. So yeah, I think that's, from a rapid fire perspective, some of the interesting stuff. But this was a very, very active weekend for the conference. Mm-hmm. Week 3 will be not as high profile in terms of the games. I think Kansas UNLV is a very underrated game, especially coming off the game that Illinois just had. UNLV obviously housed Houston week 1. That's a very fun offense to watch. It's a really good football team. Kansas and UNLV have history. They played last year in the regular season, played in the Guaranteed Rate Bowl. So that one's a really intriguing matchup for Kansas to not drop to 1-2 and really fall out of the title race, so to speak, and gain their confidence back. And then how does Jalen Daniels perform? So yeah, no shortage of interesting storylines here after 2 weeks in the Big 12.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it. Ari Temkin, Big 12 Radio Network on TuneIn.
Download the TuneIn app, everybody, and favorite the channel.
Have him on our show and be a part of what we do every week leading up to a Big 12 weekend.